You can't just turn off my water and get away with it, I muttered under my breath as I stepped onto the sun-baked gravel driveway of my ranch, the late afternoon heat making the asphalt shimmer like a mirage. The faint smell of chlorine lingered in the air where the irrigation system had sputtered to a halt, and I could hear the faint hum of distant lawnmowers blending with the buzz of cicadas. My hand brushed against the rough metal of the water valve as I turned it, the familiar click echoing in the stillness, a small victory of control in a day that had already begun with chaos. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked toward the side gate, catching sight of my neighbor's minivan parked a little too close to the edge of my property, the driver's side window reflecting the setting sun in blinding streaks. That's when I saw her, Karen Whitman, the notorious HOA president, storming across the yard with her phone raised, fingers dancing over the screen as though she were about to summon an army. Her voice cut through the warm air like a whistle, shrill and insistent. "Jack, you're shutting off the water illegally!" I froze for a second, tasting the sharp tang of anxiety that made my throat dry, feeling the tension coil like a spring under my ribs. The 911 call in her hand was more than a gesture. It was a weapon, and I could see the determination in her eyes, the way her jaw tightened, the flicker of triumph that comes from someone convinced they are untouchable. I glanced down at my own hands, callous from years of working this land, and realized that everything I needed to prove, ownership, control, authority, was already at my fingertips. The hum of the water settling into its new pattern was almost musical, a small rebellion in rhythm with the wind rustling the leaves of the oaks lining the property. My heart was hammering, but it wasn't fear, it was focus, calculating, aware that every step I took, every sound I made, was being watched, recorded in her mind even if she didn't realize that I was mentally noting her every move, every gesture, preparing for the moment when the truth would surface. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard, stretching like fingers toward us, and in that stretch of suspended time, I felt the strange thrill of anticipation, knowing that control was only temporary, and that the real battle was just beginning, that justice, patient and inevitable, was already in motion. Karen Whitman's voice carried across the yard, sharp and relentless, demanding explanations as if the facts could bend to her will, and I felt a strange mix of irritation and determination as I stepped closer, my boots crunching the gravel beneath me, each step deliberate, measured, aware that this confrontation was not about anger but about establishing boundaries that should never have been crossed. The late afternoon sun poured golden light across the ranch, highlighting the dust motes floating lazily in the air, and I could hear the faint whisper of the wind through the tall grasses lining the property, a soft counterpoint to Karen's escalating volume, each word she spoke punctuated by the subtle metallic click of her phone as she held it poised to summon the authorities. I inhaled deeply, the scent of dry earth and recently mown grass filling my senses, grounding me in the reality that this was my land, my right to manage my resources, and the thin edge of panic in Karen's eyes did not sway the facts that lay in my favor. My hand rested lightly on the gate latch, feeling the texture of weathered metal and imagining the countless hours I had spent maintaining every inch of this property, every fence post and water pipe a testament to effort, investment, and care, a narrative far more persuasive than any accusation she could make. She stepped closer, her shadow stretching long and distorted in the fading light, and I noticed the tight set of her shoulders, the way her lips moved rapidly, trying to find the words that would make her position hold authority over mine, as if force of volume could substitute for understanding of law and property rights. The ranch felt both immense and intimate at that moment, the barn looming to the side, its wood grain catching streaks of amber light, reminding me of the countless evenings spent repairing beams, securing doors, and tending to the land in ways that had made it undeniably mine, a quiet pride that strengthened my resolve. I matched her gaze steadily, letting the tension stretch, feeling my pulse quicken with focus rather than fear, recognizing the subtle choreography of human interaction unfolding in real time, each pause, each inflection a signal, a test of confidence and patience. The distant hum of a tractor from the neighboring field mingled with the birds calling out from the trees, ordinary sounds that contrasted sharply with the extraordinary intrusion of a dispute that should have been trivial, and yet here it was, a collision of entitlement and legality, a scenario that demanded careful navigation, observation, and the subtle art of asserting rights without surrendering composure. I cleared my throat slightly, a soft, deliberate sound that cut through the tension just enough to draw attention, and in that suspended moment, I realized that the real leverage was not volume or threats but calm, factual presence, knowing that every gesture I made, every measured word, would be quietly remembered and interpreted, recorded in the mind of the observer as a narrative of reason, a story of patience that might, in the end, be more persuasive than any shouted declaration. The sun sank lower, bathing the property in warm hues, elongating shadows across the gravel, the garden, the old oak tree near the fence line, and in the quiet spaces between Karen's demands, I felt the steady pulse of control return, subtle but unmistakable, a reminder that anticipation and preparation often outweigh rash action, that in the quiet moments before resolution, the balance of authority could be understood and reclaimed with clarity and precision. I stepped back slightly, taking in the full scope of the yard and the subtle shifts in Karen Whitman's demeanor as she gestured insistently with her phone, her expression tight with frustration and disbelief, and I noticed how the shadows of the oak trees stretched across the driveway, casting irregular patterns that made the gravel appear to move beneath our feet. The golden light of the evening sun created sharp contrasts on the side of the barn, highlighting the faint streaks of dust and the edges of the weathered wood as though the property itself was quietly asserting its presence. I moved slowly toward the porch, my hand brushing against the cool metal railing, feeling the texture of chipped paint and worn grooves, a tactile reminder of years spent maintaining this home and the land surrounding it. The air carried the faint aroma of freshly cut grass mingled with the earthy scent of dry soil, grounding me in the reality that this space, every pipe, every gate, every patch of garden, belonged to me. Karen's voice continued to rise and fall, each word clipped and sharp, but I focused on the rhythm, the cadence, observing her gestures, the way her fingers pressed against the phone screen, the subtle tension in her stance, and I realized that every movement told a story of someone convinced they were in control. I squared my shoulders, feeling the steady pulse of confidence return, the quiet awareness that authority is not always a matter of volume but of preparation, knowledge, and timing. I glanced at the water meter near the fence, noting the small dial turning slowly, a mechanical confirmation that the flow was under my control, that the evidence of ownership and responsibility was tangible and undeniable. The distant sound of a tractor from a neighboring field created a soft, steady background hum, punctuated occasionally by the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze, and it occurred to me how ordinary life continued around this confrontation, a reminder that persistence and calm observation often carry more weight than reactive outbursts. I shifted slightly, the gravel crunching under my boots, letting the weight of the moment settle, feeling the anticipation build, not as anxiety but as a heightened sense of awareness, noting the angles of the sun, the position of the shadows, the way Karen's eyes darted from the gate to the porch to the water meter. Each detail was a thread in the unfolding tapestry of this encounter, a narrative that I understood more fully than she could see, a story that combined patience, evidence, and timing. The porch steps creaked underfoot as I moved, a subtle auditory cue in the stillness, and I allowed a small, deliberate smile, the kind that carries quiet authority, to form as I considered the next steps, knowing that measured action, rather than haste, would define the outcome. The air grew cooler as the sun sank lower, and with it came the clarity that the property, the land I had nurtured, and the control of its resources were more than physical assets. They were the embodiment of diligence, care, and rightful authority, a presence that could be asserted without confrontation, simply by being deliberate, observant, and unwavering in the knowledge of one's own rights. I walked toward the small office at the side of the house, the wooden floorboards creaking softly under my boots, each sound amplified in the quiet evening, and the fading sunlight streamed through the blinds in thin, amber slats, catching the dust in the air and painting lines across the room that seemed to mark the passage of time itself. I sat at my desk, the smooth surface cool beneath my palms, and opened a folder containing property deeds, water rights documentation, and old correspondence with the Homeowners Association, flipping each page slowly, the paper edges whispering as I turned them, the accumulated history of ownership and responsibility laid out clearly for anyone willing to look. The smell of old ink and faint traces of wood polish filled the air, grounding me in the reality that this space, these documents, and the land outside were tangible proof of my stewardship and my rights. Outside, I could hear Karen Whitman pacing near the gate, her voice low now but sharp, muttering into her phone as if the situation demanded explanation to someone unseen, and I allowed myself a moment to watch her silhouette against the glowing horizon, noting the way her posture had shifted, the tension in her shoulders and the small gestures that betrayed uncertainty despite her attempts at authority. I spread the documents across the desk, aligning them meticulously, each signature and stamp a silent assertion of control and responsibility, and I felt a quiet satisfaction in the clarity that came from having everything organized, accessible, undeniable. The distant hum of the main road blended with the occasional bird call from the orchard, creating a natural rhythm that contrasted with the discord of the confrontation outside, and I realized that observation and preparation were more powerful than any immediate reaction, that patience and methodical action could turn the momentum in my favor. I tapped the edge of a water bill, noting the previous readings and cross-referencing them with the current flow, a small but significant exercise that reinforced the truth of my position, and I imagined the scenario where all of these details, properly presented, would render any accusation of wrongdoing meaningless. The evening air drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of warm earth and late-blooming flowers from the garden, a calming backdrop that contrasted with the urgency of Karen's actions, and I allowed myself to breathe deeply, feeling the tension in my chest ease slightly as focus replaced frustration. I glanced again at the doorway where the sunlight cast long shadows on the floorboards, noting the slight hesitation in Karen's movements, and understood that my composure, the quiet insistence on evidence and order, was slowly asserting its influence. Each moment of observation, each careful note and adjustment of the documents, built a narrative of accountability and authority that could not be ignored, and I felt the steady pulse of confidence returning, knowing that when the time came to present the facts, the truth would stand on its own. The fading light deepened the colors of the room, the warm wood tones glowing softly, and I allowed my gaze to rest on the open folder, the paper edges slightly curling in the heat of the late afternoon sun, a visual affirmation that preparation, patience, and attention to detail would carry the day, creating a foundation for clarity, fairness, and the eventual resolution of this unexpected conflict. I gathered the folder of documents carefully, sliding the property deeds and water rights papers into a neatly stacked pile on the desk, and felt the weight of responsibility and preparation settle into my shoulders, a quiet reassurance that knowledge and evidence were my allies. The sun had dipped lower now, painting the ranch in long, warm streaks of orange and gold, and the wooden floorboards beneath my boots creaked softly with each step as I moved toward the window, peering through the blinds at Karen Whitman standing near the gate, her posture tense, her phone held tightly in both hands, eyes scanning the property as if trying to assert control over a place she did not truly understand. I could see her lips moving, repeating the same phrases, her voice a low murmur now, almost drowned by the gentle rustle of leaves in the orchard and the distant hum of a tractor making its way down the neighboring field, ordinary sounds that underscored the absurdity of the confrontation and the quiet power of calm observation. I flipped open another folder containing past correspondence with the Homeowners Association, emails marked with dates and timestamps, a clear record of every interaction, and the scent of aged paper and faint traces of pencil and ink filled the room, a tactile reminder that evidence and order had weight beyond mere words. The late afternoon breeze drifted in, carrying the subtle aroma of dry earth and blooming flowers, brushing against my face and easing the tension knotting my chest, reminding me that patience and preparation were more potent than loud declarations, that every detail meticulously gathered could form a narrative impossible to ignore. I tapped a pencil lightly against the paper edge, listening to the soft rhythm, a small grounding exercise, and imagined the scenario unfolding, Karen realizing the limits of her authority, the careful presentation of facts and documents making any accusation unsustainable, the natural order of truth asserting itself without confrontation. Outside, the shadows of the oak trees stretched longer across the driveway, intertwining with the soft light, and I felt the subtle satisfaction of control returning, the awareness that measured, deliberate action could create clarity and shift the dynamic without needing to escalate the situation further. I lined up the documents precisely, checking each signature, each date, each mark, knowing that this small attention to detail would speak volumes when the moment arrived. That quiet preparation could outweigh any misperception or misplaced confidence from the other side. The air grew cooler as evening approached, the hum of distant wildlife mixing with the fading sounds of human activity, creating a serene backdrop for what had begun as tension and potential conflict, and I allowed myself a deep breath, appreciating the order and certainty I could establish through evidence, patience, and awareness, knowing that every small, deliberate act was part of the larger story of reclaiming control and asserting rightful authority over the land I had nurtured and maintained for years. I grabbed my notebook from the corner of the desk, its worn leather cover creaking slightly as I opened it to the page where I had sketched the layout of the property, marking the water lines, fences, and gates, each line deliberate and precise, a visual map of control that had taken years to perfect. The last rays of sunlight slanted through the window, casting elongated shadows across the floor, and the warm, earthy scent of the orchard outside drifted in, mingling with the faint aroma of paper and ink inside, creating a calming but alert atmosphere. I traced a finger along the lines I had drawn, imagining the path someone would have to take to challenge my authority over the property, each obstacle a silent testament to my careful planning and vigilance, and I felt a quiet surge of confidence knowing that evidence and preparation could turn any confrontation into clarity. Outside, Karen Whitman was still near the gate, her movements more restrained now, her phone lowered slightly, and I could hear the soft rustle of leaves as the evening breeze passed through the trees, carrying the subtle sound of distant birds returning to their nests. I tapped a pencil gently against the desk, listening to the rhythm, letting it synchronize with my breathing, each sound a reminder that focus and patience were far more powerful than hasty reactions, that observation and deliberate action could create an unshakable foundation for asserting rights. I reviewed the folder of previous HOA correspondence again, noting the dates, the language used, and the tone, each detail a piece of a puzzle that, when assembled, painted a clear picture of responsibilities, obligations, and boundaries, all favoring the rightful owner. The air was cool now, tinged with the scent of evening dew beginning to form on the grass and orchard trees, and I allowed my mind to project a sequence of events, visualizing Karen realizing the limits of her influence, the calm presentation of facts making any misinterpretation or misrepresentation obvious, the inevitability of clarity asserting itself without escalation. I looked back at the water meter, watching the small dial turn steadily, confirming the flow and my control over it, the tangible proof of authority that no words or accusations could invalidate. The light outside deepened into soft shades of lavender and amber, shadows stretching and intertwining across the property, and I felt a sense of timing and precision settling over the situation, understanding that patience, evidence, and awareness could subtly guide the resolution. I arranged the documents, lined up the notebooks, checked dates and signatures, each movement deliberate and methodical, a quiet choreography that emphasized order and control over chaos. The evening sounds, the distant tractor, the faint bird calls, the rustle of the orchard leaves, formed a steady backdrop to the tension, reminding me that ordinary life persisted beyond the conflict and that deliberate preparation would always speak louder than impatience. I exhaled slowly, letting my awareness extend to every detail of the ranch, the pathways, the gates, the flow of water, the position of Karen Whitman, and felt the growing certainty that the situation could be resolved with clarity and fairness, that the combination of careful observation, meticulous documentation, and steady patience would ultimately define the outcome in favor of rightful authority. I stood at the edge of the porch, the cool evening breeze brushing against my face, carrying the scent of earth and orchard blossoms, and I watched as the last streaks of sunlight faded behind the distant hills, the sky now painted in soft shades of pink and lavender, a calm contrast to the tension that had filled the yard earlier. Karen Whitman remained near the gate, her posture less rigid, her phone now resting at her side as she surveyed the property, and I noticed the subtle shift in her expression, a flicker of hesitation and realization crossing her features as she absorbed the undeniable clarity of the space and the documents I had carefully laid out. I could hear the faint hum of the irrigation system restarting in the background, the gentle flow of water returning to the pipes I controlled, a tangible affirmation of authority and order that resonated through the ranch, and the rhythmic sound blended with the rustling leaves, forming a quiet soundtrack to the moment of unspoken understanding. I moved slowly down the steps, each creak of the wooden boards underfoot deliberate, and felt the gravel crunch softly beneath my boots as I approached the center of the yard, aligning my movements with the patterns of shadow and light that stretched across the property, aware that presence and composure could convey more than words ever could. The evening air carried distant bird calls and the subtle whisper of the orchard trees swaying, creating a serene backdrop for the unfolding resolution, and I allowed myself a deep, steadying breath, feeling the weight of preparation, evidence, and patience settle firmly within me. I glanced once more at the water meter and the carefully aligned documents on the porch desk, the physical proof of ownership and responsibility undeniable and present, and I sensed the gradual acknowledgement of boundaries forming in Karen's stance, the realization that the situation was no longer about assertion through volume but about clear, demonstrable fact. I adjusted my posture, standing tall and calm, letting the quiet confidence radiate naturally, a subtle but potent reinforcement of the rights and control I had meticulously documented and maintained over the years. The shadows deepened, stretching across the driveway, the barn, and the orchard in intricate patterns, and I felt the continuity of the land and my stewardship solidify the authority I held. Every small detail, the creak of the boards, the flow of the water, the scent of the evening air, working together to affirm the reality of control and patience. Karen took a hesitant step back, her shoulders loosening slightly, and I recognized in that movement a quiet acknowledgement that the situation could not be manipulated by argument or threat, only by clarity and evidence, which I had in abundance. The soft colors of twilight bathed the ranch, the gentle chorus of the evening bringing a sense of calm and order, and I realized that through measured observation, meticulous preparation, and deliberate action, the balance had shifted subtly but definitively in favor of rightful authority, the resolution emerging not from confrontation but from the patient application of knowledge and evidence. A quiet testament to the principle that true control is earned through diligence, clarity, and composure. I heard the distant rumble of a vehicle approaching along the gravel driveway, the soft crunching of tires blending with the evening breeze as I remained near the porch, observing every detail with careful attention, and I noticed Karen Whitman stiffen slightly, her phone raised once again as she instinctively prepared to call out, though the determination in her gestures had softened under the weight of mounting clarity. The fading light cast elongated shadows across the barn and the orchard, the warm ember tones of twilight highlighting the contours of the property, and the subtle textures of the earth, the fences, and the trees, all silent witnesses to the events unfolding. I shifted my weight, feeling the cool metal of the railing beneath my fingertips, grounding myself in the present while my eyes traced the path from the gate to the water meter, confirming the reality of my control over the land and its resources, every detail accounted for in both documentation and physical presence. The sound of the vehicle grew nearer, a soft, measured rhythm against the backdrop of distant bird calls and the rustle of leaves, and I recognized it as a sign that intervention and verification were arriving, bringing the potential for impartial observation that would solidify the truth. I inhaled slowly, the scent of dry soil and blooming orchard trees filling the air, a subtle reminder of the life and work embedded in this property, and I allowed myself to notice the slight tension release in Karen's stance, the way her shoulders sagged fractionally as the reality of evidence and control settled around her. I picked up the folder of correspondence and deeds from the desk, aligning each piece carefully as though arranging the final pieces of a puzzle, and the soft paper whispers as I moved them created a quiet rhythm, reinforcing the deliberate precision with which I had built my case. The vehicle stopped, and I caught the glimpse of uniforms stepping onto the gravel, their presence bringing a calm legitimacy, a framework in which facts and evidence could be acknowledged without argument, and I felt a pulse of reassurance knowing that the clear documentation and the undeniable physical control of the property would now be recognized. Karen's gaze flickered between the approaching figures and the neatly arranged folders, and I noted the subtle recognition of limits, the understanding that authority and compliance were defined by truth, evidence, and rightful stewardship rather than assertions alone. The twilight deepened, the orchard trees and the barn bathed in muted purples and soft shadows, and I felt the steady assurance of resolution growing, each small detail from the alignment of documents to the flow of water forming a coherent narrative that would support the assertion of rights and clarity. I adjusted the position of the folders one last time, noting the reflection of the sky on the metal latch of the gate, and allowed the quiet satisfaction of preparation and observation to settle over me, the knowledge that every careful step, every note, every measured action was bringing the situation to a natural conclusion defined by fairness, accuracy, and deliberate patience. The rustling leaves, the faint vehicle hum, and the distant bird calls formed a gentle cadence, a natural soundtrack for the moment when clarity and truth would finally prevail over confusion and assumption, the calm certainty of rightful authority resonating through every aspect of the ranch. I stepped back onto the porch, the cool evening air brushing against my face as the final streaks of twilight faded into deep purples and soft blues, and I could hear the gentle flow of water resuming in the irrigation lines, a subtle but undeniable confirmation that the ranch was once again under my control. Karen Whitman stood near the gate, her phone lowered completely now, and I noticed a quiet shift in her stance, a muted acknowledgement of the boundaries that had been clearly established, the tension replaced by a hesitant acceptance that authority and truth had been reaffirmed. The orchard trees rustled softly in the breeze, their leaves catching the last glimmers of light, and the shadows they cast across the gravel driveway and the garden paths stretched long and calm, mirroring the subtle sense of resolution that settled over the property. I glanced once more at the neatly organized folders on the desk inside, the property deeds, water rights documents, and correspondence aligned precisely as if each sheet were a silent witness to the hours of observation, preparation, and careful planning that had led to this moment, and the faint scent of paper and ink mixed with the earthy aroma of the orchard to create a grounding presence. The distant hum of a tractor in the neighboring field and the soft chirping of birds returning to their nests provided a natural cadence, reinforcing the rhythm of normal life continuing alongside the conclusion of the dispute, and I allowed my gaze to sweep over the fences, gates, and water lines, each element a testament to deliberate maintenance and rightful stewardship. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of satisfaction and clarity settle into my chest, knowing that the combination of patience, observation, and well-documented evidence had quietly but definitively resolved the confrontation without escalation, and that the principles of fairness and order had been upheld. Karen Whitman adjusted slightly, taking a step back from the gate, her expression neutral but tinged with recognition that the facts were unassailable, and I sensed that the atmosphere, once charged with challenge and uncertainty, had shifted to one of mutual understanding of property boundaries and rightful authority. The evening air carried the subtle sense of dry soil and blooming flowers, mingling with the faint, cooling breeze that swept across the ranch, and I felt a quiet sense of triumph rooted not in confrontation but in the patient, deliberate application of knowledge, control, and preparedness. I glanced at the water meter, watching the small dial turn steadily, a simple yet powerful symbol that the flow and management of the property rested firmly within my rights, and every element of the scene, the shadows, the air, the sounds, and the tangible evidence, contributed to the unmistakable clarity of resolution. The sun had fully set now, leaving only soft shades of night settling across the land, and I allowed myself a slow, deliberate exhale, appreciating the calm that had returned, the affirmation that rightful authority had been quietly asserted, and the reassurance that measured, thoughtful action had ensured fairness, clarity, and the continued stewardship of the ranch without a single unnecessary conflict.